So I want to take this opportunity to formally introduce Ken Costa to all of us here tonight. Ken is a veteran investment banker, Christian philanthropist, respected speaker, author of titles such as God at Work, Know Your Why, and most recently Joseph of Arimathea. This book right here that I devoured a few weeks ago. My wife's busy at the moment reading it. And essentially it just talks about the fact that God is in the business of calling ordinary people to fulfill extraordinary callings. So well worth reading. I would definitely recommend it. And we'll get back to this book and a few of the notions written about in the book later tonight. Ken is also involved in the leadership of Holy Trinity Brompton, the largest Anglican church in the UK, where he preaches regularly. He is Dean of the HTB Leadership College in London, Chairman of Alpha International, an organization that has taught the basics of Christian principles to nearly 29 million people across the world, which is no mean feat. Ken has also worked in investment banking for 40 years, becoming the chairman of Europe, Middle East, and Africa for UBS Investment Bank, where he also became the vice chairman of the group's global investment banking division. Later, he took on the role of chairman at Lazard International, and in 2016, he was nominated as one of the top deal advisors of the last 20 years in the UK. Once again, no mean feat. He received a Master's of Law degree and a certificate in theology from the University of Cambridge, and he currently lives in London, England, with his wife, Fiona. On a more personal note, just a short personal testimony that I would like to share. All throughout my life, as far as I can remember back, I have been wrestling with the notion of calling, and really this big fat hairy why, why am I here and what should I be doing? And surely there's a bigger reason for life as we know it. So my second year, I came to salvation, and that wrestling with calling only became more and more amplified. And for the first 10 years of my working life, I was wrestling with this concept on a daily basis. I'm still wrestling with it ever so often, but in the first 10 years of my working life post-varsity, it was an ugly, dirty wrestle. It got messy often, just because I was really trying to figure out why I felt led to the business world, why I felt passionate about the marketplace, but at the same time, I was feeling guilty because the calling I was pursuing felt inferior to, for example, the calling that my granddad and my dad followed. My granddad was a missionary and a minister. My father is a missionary and was a minister. So for a long time, I felt that this internal struggle, that I cannot live out the fullness of my calling if I'm not in some traditional full-time ministry role, either behind a pulpit or in the missions field in some faraway country. So in 2016, 2017, I realized that I needed some additional input from people who have wrestled with the same topic and who have gotten more answers than I have. So I picked up two books. The one was Ask Genesis the Call, and the other one was this one right here, Know Your Why, written by Ken. This is where I met Ken for the first time, 2016-17, and both those books had a tremendous impact on my life. It really liberated my thinking around calling, what it means to be called by God, how it looks practically, and it was such a liberating realization and revelation that, as Ken puts it, God and grind do mix. You can live out the fullness of your calling in the marketplace if you've been called to the marketplace. So that was liberating, still is, and I reference both those books ever so often when I speak about this topic, which I'm very passionate about. So Ken, thank you. If I can thank you for one thing tonight, it's for the books you've written, especially this one. Also really enjoyed Joseph of Arimathea. It really does help one, especially if you are at the outset of your career and wrestling with the concept of calling and what it means to live out the fullness of your calling wherever you find yourself. So I know that everyone dialed in, not to listen to me, but to listen to you. So we are going to dive into our conversation now, and I'm going to spotlight your video so that everyone can see you when you speak. And if you are ready, we can jump right into the conversation.
Sure, Johan, and thank you so much. I mean, it's a great privilege to be able to speak to you. I suppose nice to hear all the things you've said, but at the end of the day, I always have to say, I am a class Yapi, growing up in South Africa, going to university there before doing all the other things. So my fondness and attachment to the country continues, and it's great to be able to be with you guys. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ken. It's great to have you. And you did allude to your upbringing and your heritage now, but maybe as an introductory question, if you can speak to us and give us a quick summary of where you were born, brought up, studies, career, etc. Just a quick intro of who you are and where you come from.
So, I mean, I grew up in South Africa, as I say, up on a farm in what was then called the Northern Transvaal, which is now, of course, Limpopo province. Went to school, university in Johannesburg, studied philosophy and law in Johannesburg, came over to Cambridge University, where I was studying law, but also where faith came alive. And faith came alive for me, and I realized that this was an extraordinary calling of God on my life. And so I wanted to just work out whether this was real or not. It was just all just emotional stuff. So I studied theology for a year in Cambridge, just to test that, the reason of the faith that one had. And I, came to the conclusion that God was very clearly, working in the world. I then realized that I was not called to become a preacher, which I would have loved to have done, or my friends seemed to do that. I went into the City of London, become an investment banker, where I have been and still am for the last 40 years. I chair an advisory family multifamily office at the moment, and spend time speaking, writing books, trying to encourage people in their faith in a stressful and very difficult time. No question in my mind, having been through a number of crises, this is a perfect storm that we've never seen before, and please God, we never have to do again.
Sure. Thank you so much, Ken. I think we're going to delve into the latter part of your answer just now. But maybe as a follow-up question, you found yourself as a student in South Africa during very interesting times in apartheid South Africa. If you wouldn't mind, if you could give us one or two insights of what it was like in South Africa at that time, and what you guys did as Christians on campus to alleviate some of the injustices that you saw around you.
Well, sure. Well, the first thing was, I don't think I would have regarded myself as anything other than a Marxist. At that time, I was despairing of the church, of its inability to address the injustice of the whole system. So it was very difficult to that extent. We were under constant threat. Of course, on the one hand, we were all white, in a white university, living in white homes. We had the privileges, and yet I felt this deep injustice that was being committed by an institutionally racist theology and philosophy. So that was very much my sort of background in Johannesburg. And I grew up with some great people like Steve Biko. It was one of the great tragedies of all time in South African history that he was murdered before he was able to take on what would undoubtedly have been the successor to Mandela in a very powerful way. Of our generation, there was nobody that was as bright, as intelligent. He wasn't the most innocent of people, if I can put it neutrally. He had an eye for, well, there we are. And he was a great sort of role model and a good friend. And so it was hard because one constantly felt the injustice of it, and yet at the same time, the inability to do anything meaningful about what was going to happen. And of course, the wonderful thing about South Africa was at that time, I think we were all convinced. I was president of the SRC at WITS, and on the executive of NUSAS, which is the National Union of Students. At the time, we were all convinced that there would be a bloody revolution without any question of doubt. And yet, in this amazing way, and I think in God's provision, I would look at now, that didn't happen. And an orderly transition has taken place. Of course, there are stresses and strains. I mean, democracy is, what, 25 years old. The institutions are unformed yet, but there is hope that which we feared isn't actually happening. So that's a wonderful thing to reflect on.
Thanks so much, Ken. That's very insightful. And I agree with you that the transition in 94, it was miraculous, and God's hand was surely involved in all of it. And we will come back to South Africa. So we're going to circle back to South Africa later in our discussion. But for now, as also a second introductory question, maybe just in a global pandemic, a once in a century event, it would be amiss if I didn't then ask you what you have been reminded of, any new revelations that you've received in this year. It's been a very disruptive year. We've spent, most of us have spent time in lockdown in whichever way or form, depending on where you were at in the world. I know when you spoke at Alpha earlier in July, you were elsewhere in the world. I think you're now back in London. But it would just be interesting to hear from you anything that, any revelations, anything that you were reminded of during this once in a lifetime event that we're now living through.
Sure. So here's a question. What if this lockdown is actually a God lock? What if it is that God is teaching us something that we would never have been able to learn if it weren't for the astonishing, literally the heart attack of the major economies, financial systems, health systems of the world? And I think that there is a moment in which it is almost as if God is saying to us, stop. Just stop. This is not just to Christians in churches. Just stop. It's to everyone. And ask the question, why are you doing what you're doing? What is the purpose to the life that you're leading? Now, I don't want to be facile. This is a hard time. People have died. People are insecure over their jobs. But, we have to bear in mind, it's 6 months old. I mean, it feels like an eternity. But 6 months ago, everything was looking, 6-7 months ago, everything was looking quite good. We wanted more of the same, which was the great cry. And yet, in this short period of time, we've seen massive environment enveloping, whether it's fires in Australia or in the West Coast of the United States, where there's a financial implosion of every country. There isn't a country that hasn't had a serious issue to deal with on the finances, on the economics. The health system is under pressure everywhere. Unemployment is huge and will get even worse everywhere in the world. There are, without any exceptions, that are going on. And there's the big race issue that has risen in the United States and growing. I don't have to tell you the issues there, although my personal view is that people in South Africa deal with it far better than places in the United States. So we've had this extraordinary coming together of global, it's not a local thing, but of global seismic events into which there is this macro feeling of grief that, we're grieving over the world that we've left behind 6 months ago, when you could plan for the future and do whatever you thought would be sensible in your planning and your family and where your kids would go to school and your job, and the grief that looking forward, it's not going to be the same. So into this intermediate world, we've got this macro uncertainty. You and I have got to live a day-to-day life in our workplaces, in our gyms, in our schools, in our homes, and in our churches. So it's tough. I don't have to tell any of your people listening now, and they wouldn't want to tell me. It's tough out there. It really is. But we've got a hope that we have as a gift to the world, because what the world most needs now is what we have, which is the hope for the future.
Thank you, Ken. That's very true. And I think most of us have realized over the last few months that what we thought we needed, we don't really need. And what we've forgotten to focus on, we might need to refocus on. And it surely has been a call to reinsure that the right thing in the right person, and Jesus is our focal point. And I do agree, very passionate about engaging with the world, and this is an opportunity for the church to, and people in the marketplace, Christians in the marketplace, Christians at schools and education, to actually engage and not to retreat. So I do want to delve into that, and we will get there. But as a prelude to that, most of us on this call are 25 to 40. So we're under 40. We've got a few years of work life behind us. And I'm pretty sure it's not only me, but more than a few of us have wrestled with this issue of calling, as I alluded to earlier on. And you often speak or have written about God giving you a big revelation when you were walking alongside the River Thames regarding your calling one day as a young man in London. So if you don't mind, it would be awesome for you if you could share that experience that you had with the Lord then, and how what he downloaded in your heart and the scripture he gave you next to the river, how that influenced the course of your life in the last 40 years. And then we'll circle back and approach calling from another angle after that.
Sure. Well, like all of us, we go through these times when we're not sure. I mean, the word calling is only understood by Christians, really. If I talk to my colleagues at work about calling, what are you talking about? Choices, I understand. Life choices, absolutely. But calling is something different, because it is that which God gives to his people. The Father loves his children, and he calls them specifically in this life. But what happened to me was I was going through one of those crises at work. I mean, I didn't know why I was doing what I was doing. My friends seemed to be having very fulfilled lives, running churches and seeing people come to faith, and people healed, and people, having life changes. And I thought, well, what happened to me? So I took a day out. I think it's useful to do that from time to time. I was fasting, which I think is useful for us to do that. I find that very difficult, but I did then. And I was walking along the River Thames, which many of you will know, and I was praying, saying, God, either show me, we have an expression which is in the financial markets, which you'll be familiar with, which is fill or kill. I won't give you the acronym because it means something else in Afrikaans. And I was sort of saying, fill or kill. Fill the dream or kill it. And I don't really want to mess around. And I had this very clear sign of a verse of scripture rising like a great salmon out of the river. And it was this: stay in the city until you're filled with the power from on high, which is the end of Luke's gospel. And the city meant then the city of London. And it became, I know that context is different, but that verse meant that I had a sense of assurance that what I was doing, tough as it was, difficult as it was, strain on the family, that was a calling on my life, to stay in the city until being filled with the Spirit. And that's what I've done for the last 40 years. So yeah, it's not always a rose garden. It's tough out there.
No, it sure is. Thank you, Ken, for sharing that with all of us. When we think about calling, it's also something, and I'm sure you'd agree, and I think you even would have written it somewhere, that it can't be invented. It needs to be discovered. Your calling needs to be discovered. And I think many times God speaks to us either very clearly, like he spoke to you that day next to the River Thames, or audibly, but many times it's in a beckoning and whispering manner. And almost when you look back, I think it was Søren Kierkegaard that said life needs to be lived forwards, but can only be understood backwards. So if looking at that and looking back, are there any life hacks, any pro tips that you could share with us about how best we can engage with God in order to discover that unique calling that he's given us, our way in which we engage with the Great Commission, and what we should be on the lookout for in order for us not to miss that beckoning or that whispering voice when it doesn't come in a big audible voice or in a big drop-down revelation?
Sure. I mean, I wrote a book called God at Work. The simple strapline from the book is that my workstation is my worship station. So it's very important to grasp that first piece, that where you're working is where you're worshiping. It's not in a church, and it's not contained. Worship is not in the guitar case of a worship leader. It is the day-to-day living, the day-to-day life. So before one can begin to understand calling or how to understand the nudges which God gives, and I think for most of us there are nudges that they know it's not audible, it's not, because we walk by faith and not by sight. If faith were knowledge, we wouldn't need it. We would know, but we don't. So I think the first is that very important understanding. The second is the personal disciplines, and this is where COVID has been such an advantage. It's forced us back to be dependent on God. I try and say the Our Father every day to remind myself of my dependence on Him. So that new way of praying, of being more intimate with God, spending more time reading the Bible, meditating, something we don't usually do, very important. And then in our relationships with my wife, I've spent more time with her, getting to know her. It's been most amazing, really. We've been married for 36 years. I thought I knew everything. I realized how much she's put up with. So I think it's a combination of working on the relationships, both in your workplace, with God, and with the people around you, that really sets the scene to be able to be walking with God, and then to be very quick to say, I'm sorry, I got it wrong. I've made a mistake. And for anybody listening here, if in the last week you've done something that as you're listening to me, you know in your heart of hearts you should not have done so, then allow God to touch you right now, because He is able to do that and He wants to do that. God knows you, God loves you, and God has called you. Forget everything else I say. Those three things will become the bedrock for which one can move forward and grow in the Christian life.
Thank you, Ken. I think that's profound. God knows you, He loves you, and He's called you. I'm going to make a new...
It works, it works. It does work. If you can walk like that, you can save yourself a lot of trouble.
No, I can. I fully agree with you. I think if we can make that front and center of our lives, and our thinking, and if it settles in our heart, then surely life should be much more simpler and easier. So thank you for that. Maybe this is a good segue to speak about your latest book, Joseph of Arimathea, and it handles and speaks about the extraordinary calling that God places on ordinary people. And most of us know the more familiar Josephs in the Bible, but I think it's only 16 verses, if I recall correctly, where Joseph of Arimathea features, and yet you decided to write a book about him and what he did. And the reasons behind those 16 verses actually feature in the Gospels. So we'd just be interested to hear why you thought that would be a great expose.
Well, thank you for the question. I love talking about Joe, as I've come to call him. And guys, honestly, get to know Joe. He's great. He's only 16 verses. But I don't know whether you get the feeling, as often, business people, lay people get, that actually we're just a footnote, just a bit of the small print in the life of the church. Maybe we're there for the money, or nobody ever says so, but we kind of feel that's why we're there. That one needs to look and see in the life of Joseph of Arimathea. Joseph was the one, just to recap the story, who took the body of Jesus from the cross and buried it in his own tomb. But where were the big dogs on the crucifixion? Where was Peter? Where was John? Where was Thomas? Well, I suppose we can forgive Thomas. He had doubts. But where were they? They weren't there. It was a business person, a man of influence, Joseph, who got his friend Nicodemus. They pooled their money together to buy the spices. They took this messy, bloody body from the cross. Very often it's the business people that mop up, that do the dirty work. I've got nothing, I'm not pointing fingers, I just get that feeling from time to time. And took that body in his hands on Saturday. And there was the big event, the crucifixion on Friday. There was the great event, which was the resurrection on Sunday. But he didn't know that. And the essence of that story is the ability to continue walking without knowing how the story is going to end. That's the definition of faith. I don't know how COVID is going to end, nor does anybody listening to me know how it's going to end. But we have to believe that there is someone who can show us through that, and therefore to walk not knowing how the story is going to end is an essence of the life of faith that we lead. And I thought that in the case of Joseph, he really was, there was an extraordinary calling of an ordinary person on his life. And he was a secret disciple. He didn't come out and sort of take the light. He didn't have all the followers on Insta or in social media. He lived with fear, he lived with stress, he stood up for Jesus. He was an ordinary person, he was a person of the small print. But in Luke's gospel, one verse really, really hit me. And that was that he said he did not agree, did not consent to their decision and their action when they came to condemn Jesus. He was not part of the majority. And again, I think we are called to stand up for the things that we believe that are right, whether it's in our churches, in our homes, in our schools, in our universities, in politics, wherever it is, and take that example from Joe, to stand up for justice, for an innocent man, which he saw was the person of Jesus. And that, of course, touched me, partly because it made me think of our days back in South Africa, fighting the big issues that we were fighting then. We felt we were doing the right thing, and I still think that we were. Injustice is everywhere in the world. It's not just confined to levels of race. It is inequality. It is issues of discrimination all over. But it is vital for us to stand up for that which we know to be true. And that's what Joseph did. So get to know Joe. He's a great guy.
I fully agree. Having read the book and getting my wife's feedback nightly as she's reading, I can fully attest to the fact that you need to get to know Joe. So thanks, Ken. And one thing that really did stand out for me is the chapter on the Silent Saturday, which you just alluded to. Because sometimes it's not just a Saturday, it's a few years between the promise and the fruition of that promise coming to bear. And you alluded to it now already in your previous answer about having faith and knowing where to put your faith and in who to put your faith. But how do we deal with silent Saturdays that could be silent decades in our lives as Christians, when we just don't hear what the next step is? We don't see it. We know there's a promise. Sometimes we forget about it. Sometimes it comes back in a fleeting moment. But yet daily, we need to be out there and be engaging with the world. And how do we do that in silence?
Well, you raise an important question. I don't know any Christian leader or anyone who wants to mature in the faith who hasn't had to go through Silent Saturday. And it's horrible. You feel the world is just closed in around you. And it's very typical now in COVID time that there is just no appearance of change. It becomes Hotel California. The same thing happens day after day. And you don't know where you're going. You're living with stress on education of children and family, finances, jobs, health. But that's our calling. I mean, there is a purpose. Let me give you an example. We're frustrated at the moment, and frustration is very high. I'll tell you a story from when I was at school in South Africa. We decided we were going to make some alcoholic beverage. So we bought pineapples and put it in a bottle and put sugar and water and tightened the screw top. And then, of course, what happened is it blew up and the housemaster was cross and we got into trouble, etc. But what happens is this, it's a great example of fermentation. What happens, I believe that it's not frustration we have at the moment, but a fermentation. That God is fermenting something in his people, which is an encounter with him. And when something ferments, it changes its substance from one pineapple to alcohol. They are very different. And it sort of bubbles up, just as the Spirit of God bubbles up and changes our lives. I think that at that moment, I feel that we are going through this time of real, the frustration is one thing, the fermentation is another, and it takes time. It doesn't just happen overnight. It is a day or a year or a month or whatever it is. But if we put in place the basic building blocks of knowing, because we know the resurrection, which Joe didn't, knowing that the same power that rose Jesus from the dead is available to you and to me every single day in our working lives, that he gives us joy in the midst of suffering. If you read the first letter to the Thessalonians from that Paul wrote, it is what was the distinguishing feature of the Christians, the first planted Christian community in Thessalonica. What was it? It was that in the midst of severe suffering, they were joyful. Now, I can't make that up. And it comes from God. And therefore, in the midst of the suffering, in the midst of this desert time, we walk day by day with the understanding that his grace is sufficient, that his joy is with us, and that we carry on doing the calling that we have, whether it's a computer programmer or a teacher or a doctor or a garage salesman, whatever it is, as best we can using the gifts that he has given us. Tough times, but actually hope is what is being instilled within us. And that's our great gift to the world, is hope. Because that's what the world most wants and most needs, is what we have.
Well, I think that is such a powerful analogy, because the moment you shift your paradigm from frustration to fermentation, you're not looking around you anymore. You're not looking backwards. You're not looking at the circumstances. You're actually looking forward to what God's busy doing. And I think it's such a powerful reminder, if you think fermentation, to say, okay, well, what is happening here? Why is it happening? And what will it culminate in? Whereas frustration...
Well, we had rather hoped that we might have some alcohol again. We screwed it up and bottle broke. What happens in life? It's messy. I mean, it just doesn't always run the way we think it does. No, I think a paradigm shift is very important, because it releases the joy. And instead of doing your head in, frustrated, banging, cross, actually say, God, change me now, because there is something coming through. We're going to come through this pandemic. It's not going to last forever. It's going to be tougher than we think. And when we come through it, will we come through it with people of hope and of energy and of joy that the Spirit of God gives us?
Oh, that's fantastic. And they say, don't despise the day of small beginnings. So I'm very happy that God used pineapple beer to give you this profound distilled wisdom.
I'll tell you the other thing. I have checked, bankers like indices, the index of prices of pineapple during the last time when you shut down all the liquor outlets went straight up. I mean, sort of 6 times. So good luck, the pineapple farmers.
I was walking around in a supermarket 500 meters from my house and hearing some of the customers speaking about the pineapple beer and how it went south. So I think it's been a hot commodity over the past few months, at least in South Africa.
I assure you it's pretty disgusting, but if you can't get anything else, it's probably all right.
And you also speak in the book about the fact that we need to steward our affluence and our influence. And I think stewarding our affluence, it's easier to grasp. We're thinking generosity, tithing, offering. We're thinking along those lines. And and hopefully many of us have received some great revelations on those topics because it's super important. But what we don't really speak about, and what I haven't really thought about until I read that, was that I have influence, a platform that I need to steward. And I think it would be quite worthwhile to listen to your insights into how best we could steward our influence in the marketplace as Christians, daily engaging with the world.
So, I mean, the first thing you have to realize is that you do have influence. I mean, most of us think, oh, well, you know, they're the great, the good, the politicians, the guys with all the followers, all the likes. I mean, those are the ones that influence, the influencers that everybody is seeking, and is the new sort of way of marketing in COVID. But that's not me. And that's a mistake. I mean, you know, the mother that takes the children to school and is being able to influence, you know, the other mothers there are having a difficult time, harder time, is an influencer. You have influence in your workplace with the people that you're working with. You have influence with who you speak to and how often you speak to them and what you say to them. So there are levels of influence at different levels, but all of us have influence. And you know, Joe was a great guy because he was an influential person. He was a member of the council, which was the sort of governing body in Jerusalem at the time. So he was an influencer, but it was stewarded well. He used it for a particular purpose, and the purpose was, of course, in the cause of Jesus Christ and burying the body. So that's the first. The second is that, you know, you build influence over a period of time. It doesn't just suddenly arrive. It's not some kind of gift that sort of descends by some angel over you. Suddenly say, yeah, I've got influence. You build it over time, solidly, step by step. And then I think you can lose it overnight. And therefore one has to steward it, by which I mean that one actually cares for it as a gift that is given by God, that we work at. We talk to others about how can I be more effective in influencing people, not just in coming to faith, which is of course important, but I also want to be a banker. I want to be a better computer programmer. I want to be better at working out, you know, SAS programs or whatever it is. I think that requires also a degree of humility to talk to others, rather than to be cocky and, you know, I've got all this great influence. People will listen to me when I speak. I mean, I think that's the beginning of the downfall. So yes, affluence is relatively easy. It's financial, principally. We show God the measure of our faith by the degree to which we use our finances. I mean, faith is no more, or theology is no more than your monthly credit card statement. That tells you what you believe. And then stewarding influence is an important part of how we get not only our message across to others in the marketplace of faith, but also how we operate in our day-to-day work, that we're good at what we're doing. We try to be better at what we're doing, whatever that workplace gifting is that God has given you. And that is important because others notice.
No, that's super important. And I agree with you that money is such a good gauge of where our hearts are at. So a bank statement does tell a lot. And on the topic of influence, it is, as you say, you first need to realize that you do have influence, because if you think you don't have influence, you're never going to even worry about stewarding it, because in your mind, it doesn't exist. It's not real. So it is something that we need to be more cognizant of, that we actually do have something to steward. And one of my favorite verses in the Bible is Proverbs 22, verse 29, that says, "Do you see a man skilled in his work? He will serve before kings. He will not stand before obscure men." And when you talk about doing what you're doing excellently and getting better at it, I think it's so God-honoring to do that. And it really does, over time, bring that influence for us to have those moments, even those Nicodemus moments where you've got a one-on-one with the CEO one day and he just spills the beans and asks you about why do you have a hope when no one else has a hope? What is the reason for the hope within you? And those are powerful moments where actually the influence boils over into an opportunity to speak into someone's lives. So I appreciate those insights. Thank you so much. You also speak in the book, and after that, I want to ask you a few questions about the current economic turmoil we're experiencing. But in the book, you speak about partnerships and the importance of partnerships, that they're needed for mission, maturity, and momentum. And that struck me as also very insightful. And seeing that we're a movement, Hall of Tyrannus, as a network, hopefully there'll come some strong partnerships from this in future, people working together, doing business together, and just sharing life. But maybe if you do have one or two insights on what makes for a successful partnership in the business realm. There are many Christians out there, many of us are out there, and we sometimes feel quite lonely. But how best can we take up arms with fellow Christians in the marketplace to more effectively engage and to bring about a more efficacious advancement of the kingdom?
Sure. Well, again, the picture is Joseph didn't do it on his own. He went and got hold of Nicodemus, who was a peer. So it's quite important that in a partnership, most partnerships that go wrong, in my view, are when there is an imbalance between either the equity that either putting there or the risks that are being prepared to be taken, or the objectives of the company, which is to take forward. When there's an imbalance there, that things go completely wrong. But Nicodemus was a peer of Joe. So I think the first thing to recognize is choose your partner well. I mean, he would have chosen Nicodemus because he knew that when he asked him to cough up, to put the money in, to buy the stuff, the guy was going to say yes. I mean, he wouldn't just, it's not crowdfunding. It's, just trying to ring around and say, yeah, I've got a great idea. I've got this body. I need to take it down, go and bury it somewhere. He knew the background. So choose your partner well. Really important, I think. The first. The second is that partnership is the very nature of the Trinity. The Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit are a unique economic partnership where each performs some separate function, but are nonetheless unified in the love that expresses itself between them. So it is deeply ingrained in the Christian tradition that partnerships are things that matter. The joint stock companies of the 19th century, which are now our companies, were meant to be a partnership of shareholders and management, partners, joint ventures, that we have, partnership agreements of various kinds, are all based on the notion of sharing as a strength in order to push forward. And so I think firstly, in the workplace, is to working with people that most of us have to do who don't have any faith or kind of faith, is actually to be able to do well at what you're doing and to encourage them and to bring the strength out of the partnership. That requires some degree of humility. It requires you to say, I'm not really good at accounts, but I'm great as a salesperson. So you become a salesperson working with someone in the accounts field or the finance field, such that the linking together, the 2 and 2 makes 5. And I think that mutual encouragement is, again, the essence of what it is. Now, it's not necessarily Christian, but it is focused on being able to bring the best out of the people that you're working with in order to achieve an objective that both have agreed should be reached. But then, of course, these things go wrong. And we can talk about failure separately.
Thank you, Ken. I fully agree with the sentiment that we need to take hands, and that I just believe we can't live out the fullness of our calling in isolation. Community is necessary. So for us to live out the fullness and to be the most efficacious we can be for God, we need to be in partnership and in community. So really enjoyed those insights. Before I ask my next question about what we're currently experiencing from an economic perspective globally, I'd like to encourage everyone to use the chat function to type up a few questions. At the end, there'll be time and I'll facilitate the Q&A, but there will be time for you to flight those questions. So if you can maybe start typing them, that would be great. So Ken, on the topic of the economic climate, you've seen more downswings and recessions than most of our average Hall of Tyrannus members. So it would be very valuable for us to gauge from you your insights around the current downswing, what makes it unique versus previous downswings, recessions, if anything, and insights or opinions around whether the economic system as a whole or capitalism needs an overhaul. I'm an ardent capitalist, admittedly, but does it need an overhaul? Does something need to change, and what?
Hey, as they say, you've got so many questions in there. You know, the rest of the time to do. But let me try. Let me try and unpack some of it. Does capitalism need an overhaul? Absolutely. You saw all the major big CEOs in the US come together to say that there needs to be a rebooting of the market economy, because if it's not working for everyone, it's only going to bring to social dislocation and difficulty. So I do think that there does need to be a reassessment of a purpose-driven, profitable companies that people both want to do well, but also do good, and that works in the communities. It also works in the way in which we approach the work that we're doing. Big topics, but all I want to say is yes, it does. The current economic climate is very confusing. Previous knowledge of anything else that went before is completely irrelevant. I mean, it has no relevance whatsoever to what we're facing now, because nobody knows how we're going to get out of this. We saw the Fed yesterday saying that the rates are going to be kept low for another 3 years, with the huge amount of money being pumped into the financial system. I can't see how financial markets can do anything other but either stabilize or go up significantly, just simply because of the weight of money. Whether it's the Bank of Japan or the Bank of England, or whether it's the Fed or the Europeans, I mean, everyone is pumping this money into the economy, and this, you cannot keep money in cash. You therefore need to see some real assets growing, real estate, equities, private equity, whatever that might be. Doesn't look as if inflation is anywhere in the system in the near term, but we will need to know how we grow through this. I'm more optimistic than most, because I think this pandemic we will come through it with the sort of by hook or by crook over the next few months, and the world economy is still kind of going to continue to grow, maybe not as great as it was, and China continues to grow at its internal market is big enough to grow significantly. So I think that I leave South Africa out for the moment because it has its own anomalous ways. We are under immense stress. The governments have done what they should be doing. The debt in due course will have to be repaid. But for the moment, I think enough is being done to be able to avoid the seizure of the financial system, and worse, a depression that I don't see on the horizon.
Thank you, Ken. Thank you for answering my multi-layered question or questions. I appreciate it. Something that has struck me is the listed space. You talk about cheap money and an influx of money. It needs to find a home. So as you say, it's either going to stabilize or go up. But it just feels like somewhere along the line, there'll be a massive inflationary shock, A, and B, it just feels so disconnected to the real economy if you look at what markets have done across the world, except for the blip in March. So just interested to hear your thoughts around specifically that, the sustainability of that.
Well, the financial markets always look forward, and the underlying economy is almost always a lagging indicator to where the financial markets are going. And so I'm not unduly, there are parts of the markets, the FANG stocks, are themselves in who knows, in bubble territory, some people would say, but others would say this is, and I believe this myself, that this is such a changing environment in which the way in which we are operating and will continue to operate in our purchasing and our consumption, in online deliveries, etc., will make a significant change. Having said that, the other part of the economy, the supposed value side of the equation, are not showing that growth, and I'm not convinced that there's going to be that rapid growth in that part. So you've got two parts of a market that are growing. One thing is significant is that I think you cannot be in the bond market for the moment, and therefore the surrogates are going to be found in private equity, in real estate, and in the search for yield. And increasingly, people are going to want to try and find, and there's a danger, because the risks that are going to be taken are going to be so much greater in the search for the yield that people have become used to in the old paradigm, but which I believe will be changing going forward.
Great, thank you, Ken. Appreciate it. If I can ask you an unfair question, as an outsider looking into South Africa, but you're not really an outsider in the same breath, if you find yourself on an aeroplane sitting next to President Cyril Ramaphosa on a long-haul flight, what are the 2 or 3 things that you would maybe ask him to focus on in South Africa and or to put his energy into at this point in time?
Well, I can tell you what I've actually told him directly,
That'd be great.
which is that, you know, to exercise the authority that he actually has. And one of the things I've noticed about chief executives, and that is true of politicians, is that they don't exercise the authority that they actually have, because they're constantly worrying and looking for shadows and for people threatening or whatever. But if he exercises the authority that he actually has, because he understands how economies work, I mean, he understands what is needed, he understands the need for growth, for red tape to be taken away, for the state cannot continue to grow at the expense of the private sector, and that the creation of jobs remains the most critical and important mainstay against social unrest. I would just simply repeat that. I think that South Africa is a remarkable economy, but you have to see it in the context of Africa. I mean, things work. I understand the issues, but by and large, the telephones work. The aeroplanes used to fly. They will hopefully soon be doing that again. And the people are inventive, which is a huge positive. And also, over the last 20 years, a great number of people who have been unskilled have come into the market and been skilled. So upskilling becomes an important part of economic growth. And the retreat from the state sector, shrinking of the state sector to enable the entrepreneurial and to provide incentives for entrepreneurs to create jobs and to grow the economy is absolutely front and center. What I have and would say to him on a long aeroplane, but as we'll never be able to get into an aeroplane, I think texts will have to do.
The middle seat will definitely be open, that's for sure, between the two of you. Whilst I'm on the topic of unfair questions, I'll fire this one off as a last question before we open the floor for questions from our members and guests, so guys get typing. But one thing that I see a lot and being in this space and at this age, a lot of young entrepreneurs who are either thinking of starting a business in South Africa, South African entrepreneurs, have this conundrum whether or not to start it here or to move overseas, either an existing business that's still a fledgling business, or just an idea and completely start it abroad. in a more developed, more stable, politically stable, that is, and or less corrupt geography. What would you say to an entrepreneur, where a young entrepreneur thinking about whether or not to start a business in South Africa or to move it as well as the IP abroad?
Well, that's the render unto Caesar question. You know what? I tell you what I would say, and have said, is you have no idea of just how cheap it is to live and to build a business at the early stage in South Africa, because you've got real sort of repository of intellectual capital, and things are cheap. I mean, it's cheap to buy and to rent an office or a WeWork space or whatever it is, and to develop something. And it seems to me that before one just wants to rush away, then there may be political and other reasons why people want to leave, and I wouldn't want to comment on that. But actually, there are great advantages of being able to tap into the existing resources and at the right moment to pivot. I mean, all startups pivot, you know, they say they don't, but they do. And one of the pivots may be that one moves the IP somewhere else in order to exploit it in Southeast Asia or in Europe, the US, wherever it might be. But there are certain advantages of just getting stuck in, and while you're stuck in, try and get a plan in your mind which basically doesn't ask the question. I mean, the thing that drives everybody nuts in South Africa or visitors is that every night the debate is always the same. Oh, you know, how bad is it going to be? I can't. If I wanted to leave, I couldn't leave. What about the children? What about my job? What about? Try and review that every 6 months as a disciplined matter. And I hope, you know what, I hope that you stay and be able to sort of encourage the economy as it grows. But don't try and do it every 24 hours when you're having a castle beer, or more frequently in lockdown. I think that is something that is well parked, and there may well come times when it is time to make a change, but it's not every day that you have to worry about it.
Thank you, Ken. I think it's a good discipline.
Have I made myself clear?
I think you have. I think
then I have failed.
At least the part that it is cheap to start a business here for many good reasons. So the pivot part, I think every entrepreneur would need to decide when that pivot needs to take place, or pivots in most startup lives. So thank you so much. From my side, I'm going to step back now, and we are going to look at the chat room and see if there are any questions there, and I see they're coming thick and fast. So let's go to that. Okay, so if we go to Carlos' question, following on your point of leaders not taking authority they already have, it's something we are seeing more and more, not only in government or business, but in homes as well. What do you think is the main reason for that, and how to influence it? How do we influence it?
Well, I think that all of us, it's kind of human, really. We like the comfort zone. And the quickest way to become yesterday's person is to stay in your comfort zone. People don't realize that. And I think that those that make a difference are the ones that realize that the comfort zone is a restraint on the future achievement, on the ability to change. So my encouragement would always be to someone to test the envelope, you know, test yourself, take the risk. And of course, it's risk that people don't want to take. And that's a tough one. So I would say, get out of the comfort zone, to anybody who was not exercising that authority. And that includes me, you know, everyone else.
Thank you, Ken. We can move to Kenny's question. So Kenny obviously likes your name.
And I've called that before.
And he is of the opinion that I would like your second name, which I do, it's spelled correctly. But
Yeah.
his question is, as an investment banker and someone that is called for that, what would you say is your contribution to the investment banking community? In other words, what's the specific thing that God called you to in your work, or is calling you to in your work?
Well, I think the specific thing is actually to do, whatever your hand finds to do it with all your might unto the Lord. Is actually to do the day-to-day investment banking well, to actually do it, so that it's an example for others. I mean, it's so easy not to to sort of make excuses for what what was doing. So I think that would be the one thing I would want to live. And the other is this: it's very simple. In my life verse, and I hope everybody has a verse that you can rely on in the Bible that comes back to you again and again, is that the Spirit gives life. And I look at my colleagues sometimes and look in their eyes and they're dead. The hassles at home, financial troubles, travel, uncertainty about the future, the eyes die. And I would hope that we believe that the Spirit gives life, and therefore we show life in whatever situation we find ourselves in. And that I think would be an important part.
Thank you, Ken. We've got a question from Dempers asking or saying that I'm curious to understand how you practically live out your faith in the workplace. For example, at Alvarium, how do you handle your faith in business meetings, investment decisions, and with colleagues?
Well, that is a very good question, because that's where the rubber hits the road, doesn't it? I probably do it very badly. But I think there is space for faith in a workplace. But the best thing to be sure about is that other people know that you have a certain set of values. The most important is really to find language that people can understand. I mean, sometimes when Christians talk in the workplace, I could pull my hair out. I mean, because it is gobbledygook, and nobody else will understand what you're talking about. Is to find simple language of, rather than the Bible says, Jesus told me, God says, whatever it is that there are basic values that are universal. The Bible isn't meant for just one group of people. It's a prospectus for anybody who wants to buy into it. And therefore it's good for all our lives. And I think that if we manage to translate the values that we live by and we walk the walk, that I think will be very telling.
Thank you, Ken. That's super insightful. A question from Yanni. He obviously appreciates all the wonderful insights, like all of us. Do you mind elaborating a little on how your typical day looks like? In other words, a Christian dealing with all the daily pressures. How does your day start and end?
With a Zoom call. I wish the others were as much fun as this one. Yeah, I mean, it's zoomed out. I think you've got to start the day, particularly in COVID. You've got to start the day, at least I would want to start the day. Others have different circadian rhythms. I would want to start the day, as I do now, with a time of reflection. I use an app because my son has developed it. It's brilliant. It's called Glorify, like Spotify or Shopify, which is a short meditation each day. And it's short because my attention span is short. I try to meditate using that as a help, reading some of the scriptures, reading a book or a commentary, listening to some Bible expositors who tell us what Bible is, listening to worship music that could set me up for the day. Because I think if I could just say this, for those of you, and I know there are some listening to me now, I can just sense this, you're finding it really hard to sleep, and you're waking early in the morning, and you're stressed. And you know, it is a difficult time. Now, I can't give you medical advice of any kind, but in a sense, what happens is that I think at night, all our mechanisms have switched off. And so the whole emotional turmoil arises. But from the moment you wake up, the Spirit of God brings order out of chaos. The night is chaotic. You can't control it. You're half asleep, you're half in, you're half out. You're stressed, you're fretful. But the Spirit of God begins to put order into the chaos from the time when we're waking up. That's why I think it's so important to realign at that time of the morning before the day starts. And then to take time during the day constantly to remember that we are dependent on Him.
Thank you, Ken. So Nathaniel is asking, as a fellow private equity investor, when you find a business, a target business that is great, the fundamentals are sound, but the team and or the business's purpose is not aligned with the Christian worldview, do you invest and try to influence actively that business and or management or founding team, or is it a more appropriate thing to do to pass the opportunity?
Well, if Mr. Gupta asked me to make an investment with him, I think the answer is no. There are grades of, you know, of what is a Christian view. The world and the business will not hold the views that we hold. The world is opposed to what we're doing. I mean, every part of the New Testament tells you that. So, you know, we're not called into some, and I often, when people say, I'm going to set up a Christian firm, I go, well, good luck. You know, wait until it meets the world. I want to introduce you to the world. We're called as salt and light into the world. And I mean, there are grades of this. You know, if there is a deception or a fraudulent or anything of that kind, then obviously you won't want to do that. If it's illegal, obviously you don't want to do it. With money laundering, whatever, you obviously don't want to do that. But by and large, if they have similar values, which is I want to treat people well, I want to do unto others as I would have them do it to myself, I want to make a good return on the capital invested, look after my employees, then I want to be in that to help shape that and to show that, you know, good values is also good value and will lead to better valuation, usually.
Thanks, Ken. Vimo is asking, can you share a thought on the interchange between going for it and making it happen versus God making it happen?
Well, there's a good one. You see, all of us are going to find the journey of faith a challenge, because otherwise, you know, if faith were knowledge, it wouldn't be faith. And therefore, the way I try and do this is sometimes I'm known that I just head-butting a door that doesn't want to open, and I'm not working on the damage it's doing to me from the constant head-butting. You know, God, why won't you open this door? Why won't you open? I've asked you. Meanwhile, you got so wound up in the whole thing that you may as well not have started praying in the first place. What I think is works for me, it's different for different people, is that I think what one needs to do, and I've had experience of both, is we would always expect that every deal that we're involved in will actually lead to a successful conclusion. It doesn't. That's called life. That's business. They don't always do work that way. Doesn't mean to say God isn't in them. It is that actually, you know, if you're in a business, you've got to take risks. Sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. If you pitch for a sales mandate, you get it or you don't get it. Doesn't mean to say the devil is at work because you didn't get it. But what I'd like to think is that where one understands that there is a groove in which God is moving your life, then I think one prays positively, knowing that, you know, his ways are not our ways, his thoughts are not our thoughts, but that, you know, if we stay at it and that we are constant in what we are looking for and persistent, then I think that is the way in which one stays at it rather than withdraws from it, i.e. leaving God to make things happen. Because the doors that he opened, I honestly believe no one else can close, and the doors that he closes, no one else can open.
Thank you, Ken. So Willem is asking if you could please talk to a failed business transaction or investment, specifically where you felt God led you to do the deal, how you processed that, and what hindsight taught you. You alluded to some of it in your previous answer, but maybe there's something extra there.
Yeah, it's the sort of question you hope nobody asks. Look, the fact of the matter is, we have to learn to fail well. If you haven't failed well, don't worry, you'll join that club in due course. You will fail. And so we need to learn to fail well. Yeah. I started a business with, great guys from Goldman Sachs. Everybody thought if these guys don't make it, nobody in the world would make it. They've got all the skills, all the talent, all the things, and we got the market wrong. And we shut the business. And it was very painful to do. And it still is. What did I learn through that? I learned, I suppose, do learn from the mistakes. Was it that we were prepared? We weren't as well prepared. We got the market wrong. The market's changed, and therefore that's nothing to do with us. Don't linger. You can replay the tapes in your mind 1,000 times, but it doesn't change the fact. So there's no point in lingering over the decision. The decision is made. The business is folded. This is not coming back. I mean, you can rehearse as many times as you like. To learn, obviously, don't linger, and then lean forward. I mean, leaning forward is not just some good self-help theory. It is that Jesus Christ rose from the dead. We know that there is a future, that there is a hope, that it's not all the end of the world, although actually when the deal collapses completely, or your business, as then happened, collapses, it's tough. It's a real, you think, well, God, where are you? I prayed, I did everything, and it didn't work out. It's called life. It's we will fail, and we fail well. Do learn, don't linger, lean forward to the future, not because it's just some self-help thing, but because Jesus Christ rose from the dead, and that gives us the incentive to be able to look forward.
Thank you, Ken. I'm mindful of the time. There are 2 more questions. If you're willing to go for it, we can go for those 2, and then that'll be the end. So Lee is asking, what do you think the investment banking industry or sector will look like 10 years from now? He's in the industry, so obviously curious to hear your thoughts.
Well, I think it'd be a massive change, absolutely massive change. I think technology, blockchain, will significantly change banks. I mean, I don't want to go into it now, but there is an entire world that says that the banks, credit is created in the world by banks. That's how you get credit. Banks lend money on the capital base of the deposits that they have. Well, what happens if the central banks actually just lend the money directly to all the businesses, because it's all settled in the cloud? Do we need banks? Big question. I don't know the answer. I suspect that they'll be around in 10 years, but they'll be very different, very much more automated. Artificial intelligence will make dramatic changes in the way in which data is captured, data is used, credit is assessed, decisions are made algorithmically rather than by individuals. So, and the whole nature of risk and the way in which the risk is carved up will itself also be changed. So, yep, stick to investment banking, but be very savvy and watch the trends as they change the way in which banking is done.
Thank you, Ken. And then for our very last question, Dana is asking, do you sit on any boards of companies with non-believers, and what role does prayer play in the boardroom?
Sure. Well, I don't tell anybody about it. And that would be silly. But yeah, I mean, I quietly pray. You know, when I've been in meetings when things are very, very difficult, quietly pray, believe, you know, that resolution will come, or more particularly for just an insight. Words of knowledge or spiritual gifts are given by God. Most people think they happen to be only things that you do in a church on a Sunday. They're actually, they are equipments that God gives us, like words of wisdom and an insight. So I often pray for an insight or just something that will break the logjam, or able to restate something with a broader context when things are tough. But I wish I knew the answer, and I wish it worked every time. It doesn't. It's called life.
Great. Thank you so much, Ken. We really appreciate your time, your valuable insights. As we sometimes tell each other, there is simplicity on the near side of complexity, and there's simplicity on the far side of complexity. And what you shared with us tonight, the simplicity on the far side of complexity, the distilled wisdom. We are really appreciative of that, appreciative of your time. Thank you for making time to just spend time with us, to share your heart with us and your thoughts.
No, well, thank you very much, and thank all of you for listening patiently and for not dropping off. Very early, if I were you, I'd have dropped off ages ago. But keep hope. Honestly, if anything I would leave with you is keep hopeful. Hope matters, and it's a little bit of hope that keeps you going. It's not some great big hope over the next 5 years of my life, 3 years of my life, or at the moment the next week. There are tiny little bits of hope that we build on, an answer to a prayer, a good word spoken to somebody or by someone to yourself. That makes a big difference. Little bits of hope build up this overall picture that we could look forward with confidence, because Jesus Christ rose from the dead, and he will rise out of COVID and have taught us many, many lessons. So, go for your businesses, do well, and work well. Know that your workstation is your worship station. Thank you very much.
Amazing. Thank you, Ken. Super inspiring, invigorating. I'm sure all of us will leave this call with a spring in our step. So thank you so much once again. Thanks to all our members and first-time visitors for dropping in and staying online, as Ken said, until the end. We really appreciate it. We'll see our chapter members and those visitors who want to join us again in November.